Hi, I'm Stephen Downs. I want to talk today about network learning, and in particular the idea of network learning inside an organization. I've talked before about the idea that network learning is the actual formation of connections within a network. For a person, connections between neurons in the brain; for an organization or society, connections between people, connections between ideas. And I've talked about four major criteria for success in network learning, specifically openness, autonomy, diversity, and interactiveness or connectedness. Now, these four criteria are intended to make networks reliable. That is to say, they are semantically relevant. And what that means is that networks that have these criteria make better decisions, are more reliable for use for predicting the future or determining a course of action than networks that aren't. These four criteria can be summarized fairly simply and straightforwardly. Openness is the idea that there are not clear borders to the outside of the network, that the network easily allows influences to come in and easily sends influence to the outside world. The idea here is that a network is more like a flock of birds rather than, say, a wall or a house or a building. Autonomy is the idea that members of the network make their own decisions, work according to their own values, have their own goals, have their own objectives. The idea is that each individual member of a network is deciding for him or herself, or if it's a neuron, itself, what its principles are, what its priorities are, how it will respond to any given input, to whom it will send what sort of output. Diversity is the idea that it is not a value in networks that everything be the same. Rather, it is a value that things be diverse or different. From the perspective of input, the idea here is that we want to get many different perspectives and points of view. And from the idea of function within a network, the idea is that each member performs a different function, does a different thing. We might think of this as an example. Might think, for example, of Marvin Minsky's Society of Mind, where mind is made up of many individual agents, each devoted to a small particular task. And then finally, connectedness. This is the idea that knowledge is produced by a network not as a result of multiplying the knowledge that's contained in one individual member, but rather as something that is emergent from the interactions of all members. Knowledge is more than what can be contained in any given member of the network and can only be created through the interaction of all the members of the network. So you might be thinking, well, okay, how does this relate to an organization like a school or a business or a government? Well, the first reaction is that these four criteria are exactly the opposite of the criteria that we would expect to find in organizations today. Take openness, for example. Usually organizations have very strict rules about what counts as a member and what counts as not a member. And this may be by qualifications, this may be by membership, or you go through some sort of ritual. There's all kinds of ways in which organizations, voluntary, professional, or whatever, clearly delineate what is a member and what is not. So this seems to be exactly the opposite of the network principle. Similarly with autonomy. In an organization such as a school or an institution, we usually have something like a vision statement or a mission statement that represents what everybody is going to work toward together. The idea in an organization is everybody's on the same page, works from the same playbook, speaks with the same voice. This is exactly the opposite of autonomy. Diversity, similarly. Organizations don't want people with different ideas of what to do. They don't want to see the world in different ways. The idea here is that there is a shared vision, a common vision, the same thing. And so again, we have the idea here of the organization as the one rather than the many. And then finally, interactiveness or connectedness. In an organization, typically the view or the vision is articulated from a single member, a president or a CEO, and then reflected throughout the organization. Think about all these change management things that you see, where they say that one of the essential principles is that you have to have the buy-in from senior management. The reason for this is without the will of one person whose view reflects throughout the company, you won't be able to succeed. And that's very different from the idea that one person does not create the knowledge that is produced by the organization as a whole, that it is by the interaction between all members that produces the knowledge. So, what do we say about that? Well, it means that if networks and network learning is going to have a role in the learning and in the culture of organizations in the future, that these organizations are going to have to change. Typically, organizations are very rigid and very structured. They are driven by an ownership or by a management, and this management controls the vision and the direction of the organization and manages the actions of its employees. The idea here is that the employees are shaped in some way in order to align with the principles of the ownership. This is going to have to be turned on its head in a network view of the organization. The idea here will be that the organization will draw on the strengths, the abilities, and the interests of its members. It's a view of a very democratic organization, one in which the workers decide for themselves what the product or service the organization is delivering will be. One where each member of an organization works according to the best of his capacities in conjunction with the other members of the organization, not necessarily toward a single shared vision, but rather toward mutually beneficial exchanges of value. This picture of an organization is more like a loose collection of associates rather than the strong-arm management style of the industrial age. And so I think network principles are going to change not only education, I think these principles are going to change organizations generally.